to Gordon Harris. Munchkins, all right? Let the Munchkins through. Gordon Harris, who has basically become the historian of this town. And I'm going to let Gordon take it from here and tell you why we are where we are.
Okay, well, we're at the Riverwalk. If you haven't been down to the Riverwalk, Alan Pearsall painted this huge mural. Took him about 3 years, and it tells the history of Ipswich quite well. What we're going to take a look at today is the history of the mill buildings that the mural is on, and in particular, the mill strike, which happened in June of 1913, and the events of the day, June 6, 1913, when it all came to a head. This town, as we all know, has a tiny little port. Commerce was never great at our little port. And then after the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and the embargo that came about that time, the port went down. We had very little trade. The town began to deteriorate. And actually the population of the town decreased by about 1,000 people because people just left. Matter of fact, they said that Ipswich was a town that had gone to the dogs. There was hardly a lick of paint on the town. And it sort of stayed that way through the first half of the 19th century. And then the Industrial Revolution came along. So there was a mill here. The old stone mill was right down here where the main EBSCO building is. Mm-hmm. And that was torn down later on when that building was made. And a lot of people would be surprised to find out that there was a big mill down on County Street, where the County Street Bridge is now.
And why did the mills come here?
So we had traditionally had a hosiery business, and
way back, lace making and all that?
Lace making is where it all got started. Ipswich lace was the finest, and when George Washington came to visit Ipswich, Martha said, "You've got to bring me some Ipswich lace," and that sort of morphed into hosiery and the cotton mills that started up here. So that old stone mill was a cotton mill.
Okay.
Now Amos Lawrence bought the Ipswich Mills business, which had been started by the Herds here, and developed it into what became the largest hosiery business in the entire world. Wow. Matter of fact, my grandmother in Mississippi had Ipswich hose. I remember the box there with the witch.
Okay.
Everybody seen some of those. So they needed people, and that started bringing people into the town. Now, Thomas Franklin Waters, who was really the go-to person for all the history that I write. I don't make anything up.
I call him the Obi-Wan Kenobi of
That's
Ipswich
right.
history.
That's right. He said the one thing that really changed about the town was that it was no longer just the English people that and the families who'd been here for a couple hundred years, but you could walk down the streets of Ipswich, and this was the year 1913. He said you can hear 4 or 5 languages being spoken. He said they brought a rich diversity to the town, and not only that, so many people came: Greek, and Polish, and Scottish. Even the girls from Maine and Labrador, French Canadians came here to work in these mills. And
some people say Maine's in other countries because of the
yeah.
accent, but anyway, that's a different language.
And they worked for very low wages, but they made this town quite wealthy. On June 6, 1913, there was an incident that happened at this mill in which a young lady, Nicoletta, she was shot in the head by the police and killed. And it was part of a riot of sorts. And
it was the non-English speaking people that were on strike, right?
That's right. I mean, there was about 1,500 people working, if you can imagine, in this complex. 400 or maybe 500 of those people were the English-speaking people who either lived in this town or who had come to work in this town.
So the majority were non-English speaking.
That's right. And what they found out, the people came to work here from those other countries, what they found out was they were only being paid a fraction of what the English-speaking people were being paid. So they went on strike. Did you know that they were working 72 hours a week, 12 hours a day, and 6 days a week? And for those 72 hours, the take-home pay was about $4.50 to $5 a week. We're at the corner of, very close to the corner of Saltonstall Street. Market Street's right over there. These are the big EBSCO parking lots. But I guess I should diverge for just a moment and say very few people probably know that this right here, this spot into this parking lot is where the Whipple House originally was. Not only that, people always called it the Saltonstall House because they thought Saltonstall had built it and not Matthew Whipple. So that's why this street is called Saltonstall Street.
And the seniors know the Agawam Diner was right over there.
It was right there. Now, of course, it's in Raleigh, right?
Right.
It got moved around a couple of times and finally landed in Raleigh. And
Same food, but
and the timing was perfect because you hear the train
that's
coming,
right.
and that's where the depot was, right there where the bank was. So a lot of things were right here in this corner, and we're not far from the Greek church was right over there.
Okay.
Now, what had happened is, as I was saying, is the strike had been going on for a few weeks, and the strikers here at this strike, at the Ipswich Mill strike, and there was about 1,000 strikers. Only maybe 400 or 500. Primarily the English-speaking people were still working at the mill. So the mill had to actually close some. The strikers had begun to feel a little discouraged, and some were starting to come back to work. And then what happened was because there was at that time, as a lot of people know, a labor movement. The AFL, American Federation of Labor, didn't want anything to do with these other nationalities. They were oriented mostly towards traditional American industry. But the industrial workers of the world got involved. Now they'd been at the Lawrence strike, and they were much more radical, more revolutionary. You might say socialist or communist oriented. Certainly those elements in that organization. They came to Ipswich, and they got the crowd. They had they got them organized. They got them up there. I think they were at the Greek church, and got them going, got them roused up. So this is really bad. Because it led to a chain of events. Now, while that was going on over there, over here on Town Hill, across the other side of the street, all the townies are getting really upset about the communists in town. The red people. They said, we don't want the red flag flying over Ipswich. They see this tension starting to build. They called in police from Salem and all the other towns. We had 50 police here, all up and down the streets, and the stage was getting set for a confrontation. So this was June 6th. And it was about the time that the first shift was getting out down here at the mill. And, of course, they called those people scabs. And so they came down the street. They came probably down Market Street around this corner here. And a lot of English people, speaking people are standing right here. They're watching. So, you can see them starting to walk up the street. And something happened. Now, there was one pretty young Greek girl who somehow got injured. And another girl came to her aid, but she had a brick in her hand. Matter of fact, a lot of these people had bricks in their hands. And when you got a lot of police with guns and you got people with bricks, things can happen. So someone said that somebody shot out of a window. That's what they tried to claim later on in court. And bricks started flying, and guns started firing. So it eventually went to court. We'll talk about that a little bit later, what happened in court. But apparently, the police shot about 100 rounds into the crowd. So it's amazing that not a lot of people got killed, but there were quite a number of injuries. One of these girls was shot in the cheek, and that's how that particular thing happened. And when the marchers saw this one girl lying there and another girl being shot as well, then all hell broke loose.
I mean, Nicolette, the girl who died fairly quick, right? I mean, she died in a doctor's office or something?
Yes, Dr. Bailey's office, which is not this building, but the next building over, the yellow building right there.
Okay.
Dr. Bailey's office. And so Nicoletta, unfortunately, the poor girl, she didn't even work at this mill. She worked at Brown's Mill on Brownville Avenue, but she lived, they all lived in these neighborhoods. We'll talk a little bit about the neighborhoods here, too. She came to see what was going on, and then she saw her friend was lying there with a hole in her cheek, but not dead. Nicoletta was the one girl that was killed, and she was shot probably pretty early, like you say. So she was buried the very next day at the immigrant cemetery. Maybe we'll go up and take a look at that at the end of this program.
A lot of people have not even heard about that, I think. But.
So now everybody's here together, and they start marching down the street. We're setting it up for a pretty bad confrontation. Probably those first bricks and those first shots might have happened right here. But what was happening down here at the mill was the workers, who they call scabs, were coming out of the doors. And there was probably about a dozen of the most militant strikers, maybe some of the organizers, physically attempted to jostle in some way, to hassle those people.
Well, some of these must have been people they knew because they worked with them.
Well, they probably did.
Yeah.
Although you got to say, maybe they didn't, because
didn't speak
they didn't
the
speak
language.
the same language. They probably, there was probably a good bit of isolation. Now, the mill workers also weren't living in the same neighborhoods as the traditional English-speaking people. And here we are at Estes Street. The Ipswich Mills, I'm told, is one of the first industries in the country to provide housing for their workers. So when you look down Estes Street here,
Pole Alley, which is an acceptable term.
that's right, it's a acceptable term. Sometimes we just call it the alley.
Yeah.
It was, I'm told, it was primarily a Greek neighborhood, a lot of Polish people, and probably a few people of French Canadians, a lot of Greeks and Poles. And they got along well, and they knew each other, so that was their whole neighborhood there. So the houses were filled. It's probably many of these houses are the very same houses that those workers came to work and lived in the very early 1900s.
So you had this brutality going on. Meanwhile, you had this
They're here.
rather revolutionary
The families are
company
here.
provided housing.
Well, that's right. They did provide housing. Now, the wages were low.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they charged for that housing or not either. Maybe it was taken out of their pay. So the strike was on June 6th. The strike had been going on for weeks.
Yeah.
But this day, the incident, happened on June 6th, 1913. Nicoletta was buried the very next day. Only 2 or 3 days later, there was a hearing at the district court, which we call the Old Town Hall.
Yeah.
So you can see how just so many things set up to make this thing not go right.
Trial. I mean, they were kind of revealing.
It was a hearing, but the way they conducted it was like a trial. So,
Okay.
Judge Sayward, his house is up there. The Morris Funeral Home is where it was Judge Sayward's house.
Okay.
So he was the presiding judge, and he treated it like a trial. He questioned people and basically made accusations. He especially was making accusations against the international workers representatives, because he said, so you knew that there were antagonisms between these people, and you sent them down here to set off this riot, did you not?
You
and
lit
they
the
said yes.
fuse.
They said, did you not send them down? They said yes. And you knew that when the confrontation happened, something could happen, right? And he said, we were aware of that. And he said, so you were guilty of murder. So they brought these 12 people. They accused them of murder by riot. None of those people fired a gun, or probably even threw the brick.
Yeah.
But so in that hearing on that day, and it was carried forward. Judge Sayward is the judge, and the defendant's lawyer is Judge Sayward's son. So the judge is basically acting as the accuser as well, and his son, who is also a lawyer, is the defending lawyer for these people who've been accused of murder. And so the judge actually several times cut off his son and said, "I'll take it from here." So it was very, very odd.
Oh man!
Now that's one odd thing that was going on. When the strikers got down
were
here,
they, they jailed? I mean, were they given a term or?
Well, this is the odd thing is that all the papers across the country carried the news story about that this poor girl had been shot
This
and
is a
had been
big deal.
It was a really big deal.
Yeah.
They, how it is. It happens today. It's sensational, and then the story kind of drops. But as far as I know, the charges were dropped eventually against all of them. I don't think anybody went to jail. These 12 families were kicked out on the street about a week later. All their belongings. We have pictures of their beds and everything, and they're actually sleeping on the street. Fortunately, it's summer because they don't want their stuff stolen.
Yeah.
So they're kicked out on the street. Some of them found other homes. I don't know what happened to the other people. Eventually, most of the workers ended up back at the mill. One thing I do have to say is that in addition to the mill providing housing, over the years after that, until the hosiery business went under, the wages did increase quite a bit. So within a few years, they were being paid $20 a week instead of $4 a week. The state was also getting involved in dropping the maximum number of hours that a person could be required to work. The other odd thing that happened
do you think
here,
the strike had a positive effect ultimately, or that it just kind of?
It's probably a lot like what's going on right now in this country. We have a lot of discussion about immigration and ethnic issues and things like that, and when people are siding up. But in the long run, hopefully we'll all rub off a little bit on each other, and we'll do what happened in this town. the descendants of those first Greek Polish workers still live here in Ipswich, and they've contributed greatly to the wealth and the well-being of this town. Especially if you look at the Ipswich clams business, Ipswich seafood is all up and down the coast, and these businesses bring money.
Also by Greek immigrants.
It all started with Greek immigrants, and they're a very important part of our community, and to a large extent have been assimilated, but still maintain, some of their, and that will happen. Hopefully, with what's going on right now as well.
This is an amazing part of our history, though.
It is. It's a lesson for our times, just looking at what happened here. Now, what was also happening up at the old town hall, which was that there were meetings. The English speakers were really upset about this. They were claiming, that the red flag was going to fly over Ipswich. The editor of the newspaper, George Schofield, he was also a representative. And one of the reports, at least that I read, says that he was the presiding judge at the second day of the trial, which is very odd for me because he was stirring up the white people, the English-speaking people, with the paper, and said something's got to be done. So, but with the Chronicle was much more read back in those days than it is now, and so
read as in reading, not read.
Well,
as
that's right.
I'm sorry.
And so, the head of the selectmen, his name was Hall. The police chief was also named Hall too, so I guess these guys are brothers. So you can see right there, you've got clans, you've got families, you've got the Saywards are trying and defending. The Halls are representing the town. So the head of the selectmen, Mr. Hall, stands right over here and he reads the riot act to these protesters and basically tells them, if you proceed, you're violating the law. Matter of fact, the law, apparently according to Judge Sayward, would not even allow the use of the word scabs back in those days. So a lot was going on. And this is about where it happened, right here where we're standing. The pictures will show there was a house right in here with, now, of course, we have a parking garage.
We might have another massacre. We're dodging cars here, by the way.
That's right. That's right. No more massacres. All right, so we'll fast forward a little bit on this. The strike did go on for at least another week or so, and slowly ended. The trials went on hearings went on for 2 or 3 days, and eventually this thing settled down. The mills kept going. And Ipswich Hosiery became the biggest hosiery business in the world. Now, there was one flaw in their business model that we'll have to say that this is just because of men running the hosiery business. Okay. They should have talked to the women. So we had the hoses that were made at Ipswich Mills were made very traditionally. My grandmother in Mississippi had Ipswich hose, and I remember her wearing these things. They were brown and very thick, and they had a seam going up to the back. And around 1920, women around the world were starting to wear shears. Ipswich Hosiery Company was not set up for that, and these old guys didn't get the memo apparently. And it didn't take more than about 3 or 4 years probably. They had branches in Boston and all around. It was the biggest hosiery company. One by one, these shut down to eventually, I think it was probably about 5 years later, they shut this down. So the Sylvania eventually bought it. And they manufactured, I believe it was light bulbs here.
My mother-in-law worked there.
Yeah, and then they manufactured the top secret proximity fuse, which helped win World War II. And now it's EBSCO Publishing, which is, I'm told, the biggest online publishing company in the world.
Have you ever done? Actually, we were involved in World War II in some way. I mean, the radar antenna testing.
That's right.
Was done on Great Neck. But also Lincoln Labs had a place beyond where the transfer station is.
Oh.
I had to catch myself. I was going to call it dump, like a lot of us.
You mean where the turbines are now?
Yes. And I would love to find. Nobody really knew what they were doing there. But anyhow, let's go take a look at the cemetery.
Okay, we'll go out and see what's out there.
Okay, we're at the Highland Cemetery, the new part, which is really the immigration cemetery, and it was way overgrown years ago, and through the good efforts of Bill Marcus and his wife Prudy, it's all been cleaned up. If you want to know exactly where we are, we're off of Fowler's Lane, where you take the right off of Towns Farm Road to go to the animal shelter and the water treatment plant.
The water treatment plant.
But we're gonna let Gordon take it from here.
I'm told that there are other great things that kids in Ipswich grew up playing in this neighborhood, something called Second Sands right over there. And there's the power lines that go up that I've heard that there used to be a ski tow. Perhaps, I don't know if that's true or not, but up on top of the hill is the water tank. And then there's also, there's a Baker's Pond is up there where kids used to skate. I can't imagine people skating on it now.
I played hockey.
This is a place, probably a lot of children were familiar with this particular neighborhood.
So the reason for this was the town fathers or the officials wouldn't allow these immigrants to be buried in the main part of Highland Cemetery.
I suspected as much. And matter of fact, 1913, the first burial is the same year that poor little Nicoletta, which 27-year-old young woman, Nicoletta Panalopoulos, was killed the very same year. So she must have been one of the first interments here, and it went on for 20 or 30 years. And I would think that you know, as the families became assimilated into the town of Ipswich culture, they most of the burials quit here. So, to visit the graves here is really an interesting thing because they're written. Many of them are written in Greek. We need someone who knows the language.
Modest stones.
They're modest, yeah. Nicoletta's tomb burial spot is apparently not marked. I've looked several times for it. I grew up in the Deep South, as you probably know, and people were separated by race then. And it was probably in 1913 there was something similar to that going on in Ipswich, and we're much more fortunate now that that's not going on in Ipswich anymore.
I don't want to sound romantic, but it's a pretty sylvan, nice setting here. You know,
it is a nice setting, and perhaps some of the Greek people, Polish people, wanted their own special place. There's more than just these cemeteries. The town, I think, has a dozen cemeteries in various locations.
My heritage is French Canadian. Maybe I could be.
You know, let's
not jump the gun on that.
It's very likely that your family may go back to some of the earliest people who came to Ipswich to work in the mills were the French Canadians.
Yep.
And those families have stayed around. The Marcarels were a French Canadian family. Mm-hmm. The little store down on Short Street that's still there. It was a natural food store. When I moved to town, it's been a florist. That was Marcarels.
My mother's maiden name was Benjamin, and she came from a large French Canadian family.
Yeah. The town of Ipswich has a surprising diversity.
There's tons of French Canadians.
Yeah. So it's actually a great place to walk. If you do want to come and include this in a little hike, what I often do is I start from right downtown. I go up past the church and I walk up North Main Street and then Spring Street. Take Spring Street up past where Arthur Wesley Dowell's place was, and you come up to the top of Spring Street. There's the park up there. The Dowell Park is up there, and then you can come down the hill down here and adopt a puppy or a kitten. At the animal
I've got
shelter.
3 cats out of that place. I've got enough.
I'm telling you, this town has so much history. We'll never quit meeting together for stories.
Oh no! You're going to be a regular on this show. But thank you very much. Take a stroll up here sometime.
Thank you, Nick, for filming us.
All right, putting up with us. Take it easy. All right.